Hello guys, and welcome back to another Girls Frontline 2 video. Today we're talking about a character that a lot of newer players probably overlooked completely. Dushy. And honestly, it makes sense why. She released all the way back in February last year. The meta has changed a ton since then. And compared to all the flashy new dolls we've been getting recently, Dushy kind of disappeared from the conversation. But now she's returning alongside Alva and Frontline, which honestly makes this banner setup way more interesting than people realize. Because while Frontline is bringing aggressive melee pressure, and Alva is still one of the strongest freeze defensive supports in the game, Dushy actually fits into this current freeze ecosystem surprisingly well. And after revisiting her kit, I genuinely think people have been underestimating her. Dushy's entire role revolves around enabling freeze damage through Ice's grace stacks, freeze tiles, glacial domain buffs, and passive team-wide amplification. Unlike some older supports that completely fell off over time, Dushy aged well because her value comes from synergy instead of raw numbers. Her passive increases all allied damage, while giving an additional boost specifically to freeze damage. Then, once Insight activates, the range of her active skills and support attacks increases, making her gameplay feel much smoother during actual combat. But what really makes her relevant again is how well she can slot into modern freeze-oriented teams. If you pair her with Alva, the synergy is actually very solid. Alva already provides freeze amplification, Brumal barrier support, interception attacks, and freeze debuffs. Dushy helps extend that pressure by adding even more freeze utility, freeze tile generation, damage amplification, and overall consistency. The two characters together create a very stable freeze core that feels extremely safe in harder content while still maintaining respectable damage. Now obviously, Frontline herself isn't specifically a freeze character since she's more of a melee corrosion carry, but the current banner lineup still makes Dushy more valuable than she would have been on a random rerun. Now the biggest question is whether she's still worth pulling today. And honestly, I'd say yes, but mainly for accounts that already lean into freeze synergy. If you already own Alva, or if you're planning to pull Alva during this rerun cycle, Dushy becomes significantly more attractive. Freeze as an archetype has continued aging well in the game, and supports that amplify elemental synergy usually stay relevant much longer than pure DPS characters. However, if your account is still missing universal supports, premium carries, or newer meta-defining characters, Dushy becomes harder to recommend as a priority pull. She's strong, but she's definitely more team-dependent than modern universal supports. So I wouldn't call her a must-pull, but I also definitely wouldn't call her outdated. She's one of those older characters that quietly survived power creep better than people expected. Now let's talk about her signature weapon. Unlike some newer characters whose weapons completely transform their performance, Dushy's signature feels more like an efficiency upgrade instead of a requirement. Her base kit already functions very well at V0. That said, the weapon still has good value if you're committed to freeze teams, because her kit scales through consistency and freeze amplification. But in the current meta, roster investment matters more than chasing her weapon unless you're fully dedicated to freeze teams. Now for dupes, and honestly, this is probably one of the better parts about Dushy. She feels very complete at V0. Her core utility, freeze amplification, and support functionality are all immediately available without needing extra copies, which is fantastic for free-to-play players. V1 is probably the sweet spot for most players, if it improves consistency or Ice's grace generation, because smoother cycling is usually what benefits supports the most. V2 and higher start becoming luxury territory. The scaling gets stronger, but she never feels mandatory to heavily invest into. That's part of why she aged so well. She was designed around utility and synergy instead of pure stat inflation. Overall, Dushy is not the flashiest support in the game anymore, and she's definitely not a universal plug-and-play meta monster. But if you're pulling Alva, enjoy freeze teams, or want a support that still performs well long after release, Dushy is honestly still a very respectable pickup. She may be old, but she definitely isn't dead in the meta yet. I hope you find this video helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.